Hello everyone and welcome to another exciting edition of the ESQ Practical Lawyers Academy free webinar series. And we are glad you could join us here today. My name is Chidima Agu and I'm Research and Development Associate at ESQ Training Limited. And I would also be a moderator for today's webinar. So at ESQ Training Limited, our mission is to expand the frontiers of continuous professional learning with courses and training across various areas of practice. We have tagged this webinar series the Lunch Hour webinar series, and they are slated to hold at 1 p.m. during lunch break. They hold 3 times every week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Welcome, Mr. Ade. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. However, in order to accommodate Muslim participants, the Friday webinar will hold at 11 a.m. And every session, we provide all the resources accessible to all the attendees that will be interested in such. So currently our training on mining agreements, contract and transaction issues starts 19th to 23rd of April, and it goes for just 100,000 naira. And our 5 weeks training on the mechanics of oil and gas contracts. It runs for 5 weeks, like I said, and it starts in 2nd of April to 20th of May, and it goes for just 200,000 naira. So if you're interested, just send me a message in the chat. As well, you can watch our webinars on our YouTube with the link that I'll put in the chat box. And after you're done watching, please subscribe for more premium content. So on today's topic, we'll be talking on updates on regulations of the transport tech companies. And some of the things our panelists will be talking about: the duty of the government to regulate the transport tech companies, licensing in transport, updates on regulations of transport tech companies, litigation trends in transport tech companies, and many more. So if you have any question while the webinar is ongoing, please type them in the Q&A or raise your hand, and in due time it will be answered. So I would like to introduce our speakers. Firstly, we have Yetunde Adewale. She's the head legal at Transport Service Limited. Hi, Yetunde. We also have Falake Sadiq, very pretty Falake Sadiq. Yes, I'm company secretary at Lagos Bus Service Limited. We also have hello. So we have Mr. Chuma Akana. I'm so sorry, I can't pronounce it properly. So he's the managing partner at Chester Law Practice and co-founder Innovation and Technology Lawyers Network. Welcome. And lastly, we have Mr. Ade Hashtrop. He's the senior counsel at Uber. So we're honored to have you as panelists on today's webinar. Thank you for joining us today. So on today's topic, like we all know, innovations in transport technology are essentially born out of three necessities: efficiency, ease, and safety. Scientists and transportation industry professionals work side by side to ensure that these new technologies get more people to their destination faster and safer with the fewest amount of resources possible. Not just people, to also things, goods. So, for example, now that is why we have seen that there's a shift in coal-powered trains towards ultra-fast bullet trains. So, luxurious aircrafts to budget-friendly, cost-saving models, and a switch, from gas guzzling vehicles to 100% electric cars. So there has been a lot of changes due to technology. So as technologies like AI, data science, manufacturing, and deep learning become more advanced, so too will vehicles on the roads themselves. So these fields act as the backbone for everything from autonomous vehicles to aerospace travel, and even function as the basis for transportation platforms like Uber, Lyft, and InDriver. So because of the enormous potential these technologies hold, transportation technology has become one of the fast growing and highly contested fields in the world today, and in Nigeria as well. So with all this growth and progress in transport regulations and transport tech. So our government has to be up to date, and we have our amazing panelists to keep us up to speed on everything that has been that we need to know in this webinar. So I think we'll start with Mr. Ade Hashraf, since he's one of the transport tech people that we have to put on the hot seat today. so yes, if you would love to hear what you have to say, and we also have questions for you, basically. So I think I'll let you talk right now. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. And please be easy on the questions. Any questions that are too difficult, Chuma will answer them. But yeah. Okay. So speaking about regulations for e-hailing or ride-sharing, depending on how you call it, has been a long process in Nigeria. It's taken us a while to get to the point where we've had the first set of regulations that speak specifically to e-hailing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by sort of looking at sort of a background into Uber, and then do like a little sort of history as to how the regulatory conversations occurred, talk about the key principles of like regulating ride sharing and what works for the industry, and then talk about where we are in Lagos State right now. So obviously everybody knows the line. Uber is a technology company that connects people seeking transportation or logistics persons, transportation or logistics services with independent third-party contractors that are willing to provide those services. But I think what is always less clear about companies like Uber is Uber's attitude to regulation. So Uber and companies like Uber generally do want to be regulated. But what we've had in the past is a situation where regulators have sought to regulate intermediaries as transportation operators. So they've tried to, either use historical like private hire regulation, or they've tried to use taxi regulations to regulate rideshare or e-hailing, depending on what terminology you prefer. So in terms of, I think it's important to also just look at what the differences are between the traditional sort of taxi and rideshare. So taxi operates as rank and hail. So they are on the street. You can flag them down and get in them. There's very little sort of clarity in what the pricing is like, and there is no GPS tracking. It's between everything is really between you and the driver. But technology really changed all of that stuff. So there are driver and vehicle checks, there are digital access to trip records, GPS tracking for each trip, real-time demand mapping, so that cars and driver people seeking transportation services and people providing those services can really be in the same space, and you can really match that in real time. Dynamic and upfront fares, so which means that a rider, before they get into the vehicle, knows how much a trip is going to cost or the approximate value of a trip. And then digital two-way feedback. Riders rate drivers, drivers rate riders. And then there's 24/7 customer support, all of which means that this is a very different ball game from taxi. And so you need to regulate it a little bit differently from taxi. And so the key principles or the key pillars of any regulations are regulations that protect riders, empower drivers, and ultimately improve cities. So protect riders by providing safe, reliable, and affordable transportation at the touch of a button. Empowers drivers by giving flexible economic opportunities. So you really want the barriers to entry for drivers to be low, so that as many people as possible can take advantage of those flexible earning opportunities. And then you also want to improve cities, because you want to improve congestion. You want to improve things like the efficiency of vehicles, so that taxis aren't sitting idle and running idle and things like that. So those are the kinds of things that regulators need to be looking at when they're crafting frameworks for regulating ride sharing, and that is really from our perspective. So where are we in Nigeria? Let's now just try and bring this home to Nigeria. So in 2016 was the first time sort of ride sharing came up on the legislative agenda in Nigeria. And what happened then was the Federal House of Representatives passed a resolution that in support of ride sharing. So the resolution urged, amongst other things, the recognition and integration of ride sharing into transport policies, support of ride sharing services to enhance safety of passengers, promote affordable transportation, and update the legal and regulatory frameworks where necessary, and adopt forward-looking and receptive approach to the future, all future smart mobility innovations. Now, the question is, how far have we come in meeting those? We're all lawyers on this call, and you'll be aware that transport is basically really regulated on the state level when it comes to like interstate transport. So you're dealing with state governments and sometimes local governments around the regulation of transportation services. So I will turn to Lagos and talk about the experience in Lagos and speak about where we are in Abuja um, in terms of the regulatory landscape. In most other cities, those conversations simply haven't started and will probably start at some point as those markets develop. But in Lagos, we now have some regulations, and it's important to sort of understand how we got here and the process that it took to get here. So when Uber launched in 2015 and up until 2016, the regulation on drivers was quite light. Drivers just simply need to get a Hackney permit, and they will be able to get on the road and provide transportation services. But in Q1 of 2016, the Lagos State implemented a taxi operations regulation that sought to regulate everything in the private hire space as taxi. So everything from kabu kabu to to painted cabs to private hire was sort of regulated as taxi. And that regulation really did have a number of deficiencies. Principal amongst them was that there was a cap of 10,000 licenses that could be issued. Given the size of the population in Lagos, it is very clear that 10,000 cars providing private hire or taxi services wouldn't be sufficient. There were also very high barriers to entry for drivers. So drivers were expected to pay something like 100,000 naira for a license and then pay annual renewal fees and get a bunch of other documents. And then for the operators of the transport, so if you had a fleet of vehicles, it was also very different. There were requirements around having adequate parking for your fleet, having a mobile call center, and while all very well intended, didn't really take into consideration sort of the society we live in because it had provisions around like the age of vehicles that could be used and saying that, for example, the vehicle had to be like 3 years from the date of manufacture, which simply isn't how the existing transport framework works. And so from 2016 right up until about 2017 or 2018, there was a really contentious relationship between Uber, Bolt, and and the Lagos state government because the Lagos state government sort of insisted that they should be regulated as taxi operators, and the real feeling was that that classification didn't really reflect the business model. And you would have seen sort of things in the news like the commissioner of the permanent secretary saying Uber and Bolt are illegal because they don't sort of follow what the taxi regulations say. But our very strong view was that it simply didn't apply. And so in June 2019, when the new administration came in, just after the new administration came into office, we essentially reset our relationship with the regulators. I think Folake was part of those conversations where we essentially went on a mission to beg everybody that we might have offended in the past to try and really effectively reset that relationship. And so what came out of that was conversations around regulations that eventually led to the Lagos State Transport Sector Reform Law, e-hailing Business Operations Regulations 2020. Now, I'll do a little bit of a deep dive into the regulations, but I think it's important to remind ourselves of what we were trying to achieve as an industry in terms of what those regulations should have done. So we wanted, obviously, not to have a contentious relationship with regulators and to really put the business on a sustainable footing. I wanted to protect our business model. I wanted to really focus on driving down driver compliance costs because 100,000 naira to get a taxi license is simply not affordable for the average person that's driving. And then we wanted to make sure that the regulations were future proof and that we also wanted to demonstrate our pro regulatory stance. So in those meetings, you had a lot of players, you had the big players like Bolt, Uber, and then you had the smaller people like EcoCab, My Taxi, that were all involved in those conversations. And so it was real, like a collaborative effort between the regulated and the regulators. So without sort of delving deeply into what the regulations say, and there is scope for that because I have the regulation in front of me. Where we are in Lagos right now is that the regulations can be split into regulations of drivers, vehicles, riders, and operators. for sort of the e-hailing companies or the rideshare companies. So for drivers, there are lower compliance costs. So drivers do have to get like 7 documents to be able to drive on the road, which we did try and push against. But the government very insistent that each of those documents was necessary. But it's a much lower compliance cost as opposed to what was in the taxi regulations. And very importantly, there are no caps on the number of drivers or vehicles that can provide transportation services in Lagos. On the vehicles, it's now very clear that vehicles operating on the Uber or Bolt platform or the other players are not taxi. The operational requirements for the vehicles is that they be roadworthy. So, you don't have those conversations around the age of the vehicle and the rest. And then, the licensing requirements are for the vehicles to get a Hackney permit and a vehicle body tag. On the rider side, there's an introduction of a levy that is meant to pay for the maintenance of roads in Lagos State. So it's called the Road Improvement Fund, and the fee is about 20 naira per trip. And you'll see that on your Uber or Bolt receipts when you take a trip using any of those platforms. And okay, so on the Uber side, Uber is now licensed as a service entity um, with the responsibility for ensuring that drivers and vehicles are compliant with the requirements around licensing. We are responsible for remitting the rider trip levy, and we submit weekly and monthly reports to the Ministry of Transport around the number of trips that are taken in a city. And then there are conversations around, are we able to provide additional data around anonymized and aggregated data around how people are moving around the city to allow for them to plan things like street repairs and street closures and things like that. Obviously, the regulations themselves are not perfect. It would be very, it'd be very strange for somebody being regulated to sit here and say, oh, everything is perfect with the regulations. There are still things that, we think the regulators haven't gotten quite right. There are very good intentions there, and I think the execution is just what we have to work on. And in terms of the current status, the Ministry of Justice is now redrafting the regulations to take into account all the concerns that have been raised. But that said, the ride-sharing companies, drivers, and riders have started moving towards compliance with the regulations. So that's where we are. I don't know if anybody wants to go into more detail or has any questions. I'd be happy to answer them.
Yes, so I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, okay. So with the recent ruling in London regarding the Uber drivers' rights, like every other worker, with minimum wage, tax, and all of that. So how do you think that affects Uber drivers in Nigeria?
That's a very interesting question, right? I think the first thing that we should say is that the law in the UK is actually quite nuanced, in that in the UK there are 3 classes of relationship. So you have independent contractor, you have worker, which is really an intermediate classification, and then you have employee. What the Supreme Court ruled was that in 2016 that drivers operating on the Uber platform would be considered workers under UK law. Uber has since taken a decision to essentially extend worker status to all drivers operating in the UK. It's the right thing to do. Uber has always argued that drivers should have the should have additional benefits. But I think that what many regulations around labor across the world force us to do is into this false dichotomy between independent contractor and worker. And you can sometimes be penalized for giving people benefits when in fact, the giving of benefits would be indicative of the existence of an employment relationship, and so sort of raises risks. We think there's a third way. We think there's a way where labor laws can be brought into can sort of reflect better how people work today, and what the changes in the labor market has been in the last 50 odd years. So it's something that it's London. London is very peculiar. So I think the change, the independent contractor status will stay in Nigeria. We will continue to look for how we can give drivers additional benefits, And we'll look at that across the world, and we will have those regulatory conversations around IC plus, which we've had in places like the US and in India, where there's a new third way that has been crafted and is now part of the laws in those countries.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that answering that question. And I have one more question for you. So, if you were a regulator for just a day in Nigeria, what would you like to change about our transport regulations?
I think that's a very interesting question, right? I think that our transport regulations are quite wide. I think that what I would change specifically is I would write the the ride sharing law myself, so I could mark my own homework. I think that there are changes, and I think that the ability to the ability to for regulators to be more responsive is something I would change. I would sort of maybe empanel things I would consider us to review laws every few years. So it wouldn't be changing specific provisions, but it's just to make sure that we look at the laws, because you often end up in situations where regulators, courts, and it's not just in the transport sector, are trying to apply laws that were written very long ago to situations that weren't even in the contemplation of the regulators at that time to modern situations. So yeah, that's what I would change. And I can see a question from Max, who has asked, could I touch on the regulatory situation in Abuja, um, especially AMAC and the airport with FAN? Okay, so the regulatory situation in Abuja is interesting. So the Abuja Municipal Area Council has historically been able to levy car park fees and has argued that Uber should pay car park fees. We take a slightly different view in that drivers don't generally operate out of council-run car parks in the first instance, and in the second instance, that drivers are independent contractors, and so Uber isn't responsible for like their licensing obligations. But we don't think those licensing obligations exist. In short, the situation with AMAC is now pending before the courts. Uber has instituted an action before the high courts seeking certain interpretation of the AMAC bylaws, which purportedly give them the power to levy those fees. More broadly, I think this is a crucial thing here. We're working with the FCT Transport Secretariat to craft a similar regulatory framework to Lagos, where rideshare is sort of carved out and it's clear what the regulations are and what the rules of the road are. So I think I'm actually going to be looked at in a vacuum. There's a broader engagement in Abuja around regulations. Around the airport with FAN, we've been engaging with FAN for quite some time, and honestly, the engagements have been very fruitful. I think that COVID and the disruption of travel really ended those conversations before we could finish them. But yeah, I think it's something that we will look to close out on as the world really reopens.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ade, for the clarification question and answering it properly. So I think I'll take you away from the hot seats and put someone else. Yes. So Mrs. Yetunde Adewale. So I think you're now on the hot seat now. So I think you can make your
Okay.
presentation. Yes.
All
You
right.
have
Would you
slides.
like me to
can just share.
project?
Yes. Yes.
Would
You
you like
can
to?
if
All
you
right.
want. Yes. Yes.
So I have a presentation, and I'll run through my presentation quickly. Okay. By way of introduction, the transportation sector is has a potential of providing, making its own provision into the GDP of Nigeria. Per Hassan Bello, the Executive Secretary of the Nigerian Shippers Council, has stated that the potential of the sector, if regulated, is up to about 10%, And also, we found that various means of modern transportation have found its way into road transportation, basically, in view of modernization, overcrowding, and the likes of it. And so we have various platforms that's in like over 20 years ago or thereabouts, or even less, that we didn't have, feature in the past. We have them, right now in the system, right now in the sector. So we have the likes of Uber, Bolt, and the rest of them. And then also, we also have the fact that this, all this introduction or into the sector, they are wholly not regulated, centrally not regulated. It's more like, will I say, a free for all, because there isn't a system, a general or sole regulator for this transportation sector precisely. However, in Lagos State, I would say that we have, Lagos State is trading the place in respect of regulating. I would say this because transportation or regulating this sector really lies within the concurrent lists for interstate. So states really have the power to make regulations when it comes to road transportation. This is road transportation exclusively, and not other forms of transportation when we have aviation and the rest of them, which are wholly federal regulated. Also, other features of what Lagos State has brought into the fore is currently we have a road transportation reformed law that is a very new feature. This just came up in last month, and we're hoping that with this law coming into the sector, there will be much more sanity in the system. And also private companies such as where I work, we also have used modern day technology by way of monitoring our vehicles to ensure that we're able to monitor where there have been disobedience to the law, and monitor things regularly, even as those drivers are on the vehicles. So today, what the duty of the government in regulating the sector, I identified 3 basic reasons why the government should regulate the sector. The first is to safeguard lives. This is entrenched in the Constitution. The right to life is really the right of citizens, and which the government has to secure. And also revenue generation, of course, this is paramount to any government. And then also the protection of the business itself, to ensure that those honest businesses that are there are not undercut by the fraudulent ones. So what's the position of licensing in modern day Nigeria in this industry or in this sector? Okay, modern day Nigeria, there's no sole regulator, central sole regulator. As such, there is no standardization or professionalism in this in the transportation sector. However, we have the transportation bill. It's been underway since 2015. Today, it has not been assented to yet by the president, but that bill has various features that we are hopeful will regulate the industry wholly. However, the bill is not targeted at just the road transportation sector. It's actually into all the spheres of transportation, including aviation, sea, rail, and all the others. But for entry level, in order to be able to, the basic licensing requirements for entry level into the Nigerian transportation sector, of course, sourced from various statutes. They include the following: business registration, of course. To be able to have a business in Nigeria, you have to be registered with the Corporate Affairs Commission. And then to be able to drive a vehicle, you should have your driver's license. This is sourced from the Federal Road Safety Act. And then also you have the insurance. The insurance is third-party insurance is mandatory. And then there are various vehicle documentations that you should also have. These include the vehicle license. There's an annual provision for any form of vehicle, the roadworthiness certificate, the MOT certificate, and then registration with local union based on, dependent on the states or the local government where you operate from. And then we also have a feature of the FRSC Act. You have the Road Transportation Safety Standardization Scheme, which is an offshoot of the regulations made pursuant to from the Road FRSA Act, and it licenses basically fleet operators of about the minimum of five vehicles and more. It doesn't matter if you're commercial or private, as long as you have up to 5 vehicles in your fleet. And this is meant to standardize safety. The target of the FRS is actually to standardize safety on the road. So these are the basic licensing requirements as sourced from various statutory provisions. What's the position today with regulation of tech companies and online hailing platforms? For Lagos State, we said this, they are the trailblazers. They've been able to, the state government has been able to pass a guideline, which became effective last year, August. And some of the licensing requirements but the target is really for taxis, basically, include the vehicle type, the vehicle has to be brand new, also minimum of 3 years of age. Then the drivers, the licensing requirement for the drivers, their age range. Then also you have the licensing fee, which is a new feature, which if a couple of the operators kicked against, but I believe it's still applicable to date. You have the service tax of 10% on each ride, and then you have the enforcement agencies, and there are other highlights of the guideline. But basically, it's only to regulate taxi operations within the Lagos State for the online taxi platforms. What are the trends and the forecasts for transportation, the online transportation in generally speaking? Okay, today we've not had the opportunity to have so many cases recorded. The few that have been recorded have just not tested the whole rigor of adjudication. We have one that's that was filed by some drivers to identify the status of these drivers, whether they were only employees or independent contractors, but the courts struck out the suits. However, we have speculations of some trends that we should expect based on the various inroads that we have today in the sector. First, what the constitutionality of some of these platforms, and the constitutionality of some of the guidelines that regulate them, like for the Lagos State guideline, which was a guideline made by the Ministry of Transportation, and it's not sourced from the principal legislation. We have the data privacy, that some terms of the guidelines may breach the data protection regulation of Nigeria, 2019. And then we have the issue of taxation. I'm not a tax expert, but I know that some of these taxes may still face the rigors of litigation in the future. And then also the focus of the guideline on taxi hailing, because today what we have is the fact that taxi hailing is what we are seeing. What about other aspects of road transportation that have not been regulated? We're talking about transportation of passengers, of goods and services. The focus really is on those ones that are so obvious, which is the e-taxi platforms. So the recommendations really is that whilst the government should focus on regulating this sector for the purposes of generating revenue, which is very, very important, the focus should also be more beamed towards safety and security of passengers, because we have today passengers entrust their lives even in the hands of drivers that have if they are not regulated, if there isn't any source, like at times you take some of these online taxis and you can't even reach a customer service immediately to be able to report incidences until the ride has expired. If there is a form of regulation in place that can guarantee the safety, security, and minimum insurance requirements for them, for the companies. This would come in a lot, because once safety and security is ensured, you find out that revenue will just be, a walkover, because people have more trust in the system and they can employ it more and then make use of it, and thereby revenue will definitely, come in with as an offshoot of this. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I appreciate this.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Yetunde. So I have 3 questions for you. I don't think we have any questions in the Q&A, but I have 3 questions for you personally. So first of all, is there anything peculiar to the management of private vehicle transportation?
Anything peculiar
Yes.
to the management?
Yes.
I didn't get that, sorry.
Like, is there any like thing that's different or stands the private transport sector that you work in? Like, is there anything that stands you out from the public?
Oh, okay. Well, what stands us out basically is that for the private, at least for private, you could determine who your customers are. Unlike, you could just deal in like what we currently do in our own business. You could just deal with from business to business rather than, face everyone commercially. So yes, that's the difference there for with us as a, private.
Okay, okay, okay. And with the, you know how trailers, all these trailers, tankers, they are, some of them are unregistered, and some of them also have unlicensed drivers.
Yes.
So how efficient do you think that efficient is the enforcement of the insurance policy when it comes to private cars and these trailers and tankers and drivers that are unlicensed that handle those trailers?
Okay. If you're talking about the efficiency of insurance now with unlicensed, what I see mostly in our day to day is that well, it's a requirement, but at times you could find that some accidents will occur and these vehicle drivers just abscond from the scene. And once they abscond from the scene, there is absolutely no way to be able to trace them. And so you find that for private companies that are registered, that are, out there, or, major establishments, you're easily able to, trace them. But for that, and that's where the regulation comes in. And then we've had incidents of people just having accidents, killing, trails of people are on the way, and then the driver simply absconding, and then you start looking for tracing and all that. That's where the effectiveness of the regulation or a sole regulator coming in would really alleviate the situation, because as it is today, it's really, enforcement is difficult. I won't say it's impossible if the law enforcement agencies really go all the way out to investigate. Yes, at times they're able to, but it's not something that is so easy that they achieve with a snap of a finger. So yes, it is very important for, the law is, the position of the law is very clear now. You must have your third-party insurance, you must have your vehicle license. But is this what is obtainable? No, it is not what is obtainable. People are still out there, people still breach the law. And then when situations come up, innocent citizens are just there, no one to, no insurance company to be able to hold on to, or, there's no one to hold for, to be liable for accidents of drivers on the road. So it's not so effective. There's still a lot of gaps that should be closed in that regard.
So is there any advice you can give when, for example, when such accidents occur, what can the drivers of such private vehicles, especially if it's a transport tech vehicle, or an Uber driver or something, if that kind of accident happened, what do you advise that driver to do at that point in time?
Really, it's not an advice to the driver. I would say that the requirements should be more stringent, which is that a vehicle that should be on the road should have not just the minimum third-party insurance, but there should be public liability insurance. There should be other insurance that should be made mandatory. And if those mandatory ones that they are effective and they are in place, it will be a lot easier to hold on to, for third parties, to be able to hold on, have recourse, for liabilities in instances like that. You go to the developed countries, and when you have accidents, you don't even need to start negotiating or dragging with the other party. You just call on your insurance and they take it up from there. So the minimum requirement which you have today, the third party insurance, which the third party insurance act, sorry, which you have today, is a very old law. Maybe the position of the law should be reviewed. Some of those provisions as it relates to commercial vehicles has to be upgraded. There should be some liabilities, that should cover some level of, damages, loss of life, damage to property and all that. And when you're secure in that, people would have more trust and faith in these services more, and then using them will be a lot easier. And then at the end of the day, that amounts to revenue to the government and to the users, to the owners as well.
Okay, so I still have one more question for you, but Mr. Ade, I think you came on to say something.
Yes, it's hand raised.
Yes, I did. So I think on the issue of insurance and sort of in an accident, what happens? I think that, so a couple of things. In the most recent version of the regulations, so the guidelines were done in August. The regulations themselves were done in November, but I'm not sure if they've been published. There are additional insurance requirements on rideshare companies. But Uber had for the past, I think, 4 years already had insurance that would cover a rider and a driver while they were on the trip. The regulations now codify that in Lagos. In terms of what happens after a trip, I think this is where that technology argument or the benefits of technology come in. There is two-way reporting. A driver can report an accident has happened. A rider can report an accident has happened, and we will then share things like the insurance details for making claims. We will also sort of give support to law enforcement. So we have a portal where law enforcement can make requests, and we can look at what data we have and share for things like criminal investigations and things like that. So, so the regulations have gone some way in sort of improving that, but obviously things can always be better, and the proof will be in how the regulations are implemented and if there's a level playing field for all players.
Thank you, Mr. Ade. So over to you. Your last question. So
Okay,
the same question I asked him, last question. So if you're a regulator for a public regulator, like a government regulator official,
okay.
so what would you like to change in the area of transport tech regulation in Nigeria?
Okay, I'm trying to think about what would be my priority now. But I think what I would really love to change is, I think it would have to do with there are lots of things that comes to mind, but I think the foremost is about there being a sole regulator, especially for road transportation, so that there will be a minimum requirement for entry level. And I'm not talking about taxi hailing, which is limited to interstate within a state. I'm talking about the whole of Nigeria, because currently what you have is that if you're in business in road transportation, what's obtainable in Lagos State, for instance, different from what's obtainable once you move out to the next state and to the next state. And you have just so many multiple requirements that you have to meet. So when you move into the East, you have at times where you have vehicle documentations that you've obtained legitimately from Lagos State, and you drive all the way down into the North, for instance, and then you have your drivers apprehended because of the same vehicle documentation. I'm talking of exact same documents. I'm not talking of different documents now. You have the vehicle inspection service. They tell you, okay, this is, this is states, this one is from Lagos State, you have to obtain. So they are just multiple layers of statutes, all over the place at state level and local government level. If this could be centralized, if it's just one unified. So I had a colleague from Ghana, and he told me, he said, our lawyer, what are the basic documentation that a vehicle should have in order to ply Nigerian roads? And I said to him, well, I can tell you the basic ones, but I can't tell you more than that, because once you move into other states, you just have so many other requirements that you can't even put them all together in a bucket, and they keep changing. You could have them, this is the position today, and tomorrow it changes. So if I were just in office and as a public officer, and I'm able to change this is what I would totally change. And I'm talking about interstate travel. Today, interstate travel can be a nightmare for operators. You just have the provisions are just all over the place. It's not unified. It's not in one bit. You move from even one local government to the next, and for Lagos State, it's a lot more sane, but just go down, move into other states, and then it's either one law or the other. You don't even know one policy or the other. All this needs to be unified, changed, and then we can say, okay, we have one or a bunch of documents. This is what you have, and then you can move safely across all the roads, and once you show those documents, and you can do your business safely without being harassed or, by law enforcement agencies all over the place. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Mrs. Falake Sadiq. Yes. So I must say, I really pity. I mean, you're very pity. So, yes, I think you're mute. You're muted.
My bad. I was saying, so are you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I don't know if you have a presentation.
No, I don't.
Or I should just, okay. So I would love to know, yes, what are the operational efficiency of the public buses in Nigeria? What can you say about that?
Okay. I think first and foremost, thank you for inviting me on this forum. I think things like this are quite important because I know that before I moved from practice in a law firm in-house, if someone had said to me, what's going on with public bus transport, I'm like, what's my business with that? So things like this are quite informative. So I will be speaking not as a government agency or representative. I'm a private citizen that just has some experience with these things. And what I would say is, in my experience, when it comes to what I want to talk about is the relationship between public bus transportation and the government, right? In my experience, being a private company affiliated with the government, what you tend to see is that, especially when we just started, people telling us and telling the government that the government has no business in transportation. The business of transportation is not something that the government should be involved in. And the people that have made this argument are not just talking, they have some valid points. Because if you look at the history of public bus transportation in Nigeria, from the LSTC to all sorts, from the Jakonde days, long before I was born, what you would find is that there would be some kind of involvement by government. And then after a while, everything will fizzle out. And then you go back to the rickety downfalls and nothing really sustainable happens. And that's why, so that is a valid reason why government shouldn't be involved, because of the consecutive failures. But because transportation, and I'm not talking private here, I'm talking about public bus transportation, is a social need. Regardless of where you are in the world, not to now talk about somewhere that, or like Lagos State that has 17, is projected to have about 70 million people. People need to get round. It is almost like a basic right. People need to get from point A to point B. As it is, the economy is still suffering from the lockdown period that we had and movement restrictions. So while it is cool for us to say, oh, things are going digital, we can be working from home, it is very difficult for the Basira and things selling at Tejo show to move to, it was going to take a long time before they start selling on Jumia. These people still need to move around. So, and considering the fact that public bus transportation is not something that is that has high profit margins, right? It is very difficult for government to just leave it to private companies. Because if you leave it to private companies solely, what the driving force for private companies will be profits, as opposed to the need to move people around from place to place. As it is estimated that about Lagos State loses about 1.5 billion US dollars just to congestion alone. And that is not, that doesn't include people that can't move around because, you know, there are no buses, or people, or situations where it takes you twice as long to get to a certain place. Just sitting in traffic alone is losing what is the structure of that involvement, right? Now, as I said before, public bus, if you leave it to private companies, private overheads, how do I make profit? Now, what government needs to do, and what governments all over the world tend to do, is to create an enabling environment for private companies to come and invest, right? And I will domicile it in Lagos. There's no country you will go in the world where they have a functioning public transportation system and it's just left to private companies. What happens is that the government usually looks to the private companies and tries to see how we can, you know, make the environment viable for them, and not a situation where the government actually performs the act of public transportation. That's where I would draw the line. If we have to be honest, governments are slow in just their way of operation, so they shouldn't in the entirety be the ones in charge of public transportation. So bringing it to Lagos, which is what I can speak about, what we have is a situation whereby the government sought to change the way things were. What we had prior to this new set of buses were just rickety, downfall buses that were just not safe or convenient for commuters. So the government approached private companies, essentially, or sought collaboration with private companies. Okay, how can we make this environment suitable for you? And what they did was to provide buses, provide depots, provide terminals. And as it is in Lagos, we have a structure whereby there is an entity known as the Lagos Metropolitan Transport Authority, otherwise called LAMATA, that's in charge of regulation of public bus transportation. And then that entity encourages private entities like LBSL, TSL, Primero to provide the service that it needs. You're frozen. I don't know if it's my network. Hello, are you there? Okay.
Hello?
Are you back?
Yes, I am.
Yes, can you have a situation whereby Lagos State, through LAMATA, issues licenses to private companies. And these private companies then public bus transportation. And then Lamata oversees and sets the standards. So you're expected, and they control quite a number of things in terms of, driver regulations, how you get your license, the training of drivers, basically everything that you need to run effective bus transportation is what Lamata oversees and provides an enabling environment for public transportation. So as regards, because you had asked me a question when we were talking earlier, where you said, what are the challenges facing bus operators in Lagos State? The challenges are numerous. One of it is, okay, so generally, the challenge everywhere is things like road accidents, right? Loss of life, all of that, that is almost inevitable. You can try and mitigate it. But when it comes to Lagos State, right, some of the challenges we're facing are things like being a soft target when it comes to public unrest. I don't know if you heard when during the NSAS protest, we lost 23 brand new buses. I can't, it was like a personal loss to me because, so brand new buses just bounce like that. And just moving from route to route, while a lot of our commuters are thankful for our service because it's comfortable, it has AC, you can charge your phone, it's nice. Are thankful for our service. Our competitors, and by this I'm not talking about other bus companies, I mean like the non-regulated, if we can call that sector, are not particularly happy about the fact that we are taking some of their market share. Because what you will find is that while the minibuses can take 12 to 15 people, our buses can take, 40 people sitting, 30 people sitting, about 65 people, which is like three buses. So it's affecting their market share. So there's a lot of resistance, a lot of damages to our buses, a lot of, hostile, we're operating in a hostile environment somewhat, yeah? So that is one of the challenges that we face. Another one is it's revenue leakage. Technology is extremely, extremely important to anything nowadays, right? The problem is when you have different people in the process of collecting funds, right? No matter how perfect you are, no matter, there will be revenue leakage. That's why we need technology, right? To help us to close the gap with that problem, right? So what you find is that although right now, I must commend Lamata because we now have something called a cowrie card. Basically, what that cowrie card is, regardless of which bus you are on, whether it's an LBSL bus, TSL bus, you take that card and you can get on any bus. And my understanding is that it's going to be so integrated that at some point you can also use it for water transport, you can use it for rail, you can move around just the way you would have the Oyster card in London, right? So that is one of our biggest challenges, plugging the revenue leakage. We're on the way there because we're getting technology soon, but it's going to take some time. And considering that it's a system or it's a business where the revenue margins, the profit margins are extremely slim because it's something that involves a lot of capital. The cost of a bus is not cheap. The cost of fueling takes almost 50% of our revenue. So anything, any amount we can get is always very important. Apart from that, another challenge that I find, apart from security and all of that, is for public bus transportation. If you look at it, Lagos State has maybe 1,000 buses. And by it, I mean high capacity / medium capacity buses. Those are the big ones, not the downfall size buses. And that is grossly inadequate. To give it some context, London has a population of about, is it 88 million, right? And it has 8,000 buses. We have a population of about 17 million in Lagos, and we have 1,000 high capacity. In London, they have about 8,000 double-decker buses. So what you find is that the state still has a lot to do. The private operators still have a lot to do in terms of providing for the populace, because there aren't just enough buses. Yes, there are downfall buses, but that shouldn't be the standard for any, for a metropolitan city like Lagos State. So, yeah. And furthermore, in terms of regulation, I think I've spoken about that. Lamata provides regulation. Where there's also a new law, right? Now, while I have a fair idea of what that law says, it was only passed 2 weeks ago. What that law, I haven't seen the final copy, but what that law just does is, or the enacted copy, what that law just does is kind of harmonizes and regularizes the position, strengthening Lamata's powers as a bus regulator, and stating what they can do, how they are to regulate. So it is, as opposed to the previous law, well, actually, the penultimate law, the previous law was a bit different in structure. The penultimate law, which it just stated that Lamata shall be involved, shall be responsible for bus operations. This new law actually vests Lamata with all the powers that it needs. That law has been passed. I don't believe it has been assented to. So I'm just speaking as far what I am, because we were involved in the process of passing the law. We were asked to provide representation, provide our comments. So I'm just speaking based on what I know. I haven't seen the enacted copy. So that, if that is indeed what ended up in the law, what we have is a framework for bus transportation. Another thing that I will add is also the harmonization of the different agencies of government and how they support public bus transportation. So we have a situation where in Lagos State, we have LBSL has a training institute, but it works hand in hand with, for bus drivers. It works hand in hand with MVAA, the licensing authority, FRSC. Also, we work hand in hand with Lamata, not Lamata, LASMA, because, we just need them on the road. Sometimes they more or less protect us, transportation, directing traffic and all of that. So as it concerns Lagos State and the regulatory framework, I would say that it's creating an example for other states. I'm not saying it's perfect. There are gaps here and there, but at least there's a framework. I know that as a public bus company, I can go to if I have problems, FRSC will help me, LASMA will help me. There's that kind of synergy, harmonization, which in essence helps the whole process of transportation and moving people around. So without talking too much, I think that is a somewhat brief, not that brief, explanation of what public transport looks like in Lagos State and what the regulation is like. Thank you.
So I have some questions for you. So
Okay.
just like I asked Mrs. Yetunde, is there anything peculiar to the management of public transportation?
Is there anything peculiar to bus transportation? Yeah. In what sense?
In the public sector, because I asked her because she works in the private sector transportation. So is there anything peculiar to um, the public transportation sector in Nigeria or in Lagos?
Well, peculiar, I wouldn't say it's peculiar in the sense that because it's something that you would find regardless of which area you're in. I mean, what state you're in, right? In Lagos State. If you go to what area you're in Nigeria, if you go to other countries like Singapore and all of that, they also have their challenges, right? But I would say it's still the challenges really, because what you find is while the government is quite supportive, sometimes there are interference that may or may not really help the business. But in the large, the government is supportive, right? Sometimes I wouldn't call it insecurity, but actually, if we're calling calling a spade, it is actually insecurity along the routes. The hostile nature that of other operators. Fine, the government is really trying to engage associations like NURTW, RETEN, and making sure we kind of harmonize, understand that, you know, there's enough fish in the ocean for everybody really. So we're not, even if, yes, we're encroaching on your lane, there's 17 million people that need to move around in Lagos State, right? What we need from government is a situation where they understand that even if there's a bus operator on their route, they can move to other routes that are not as populated. There are other people in other places that need to move around. So actually, the government has started, but we need their involvement in sorting out these issues with the union and bus operators, and making sure that the safety of commuters, safety of our drivers is ensured at all times.
Thank you. Okay,
Does that answer your question?
Yes, you answered it. So another question: how has the entrance of the transport tech companies disrupted the industry, the public?
Disrupted? It hasn't disrupted it at all. At all. It
So
is
there's
a
no
welcome threat. Yeah. Is it Uber that wants to threaten us? No. there's no threat at all. Actually, if I did recollect, we've actually had meetings with some of this with Uber in the past about, you know, and with the government actually, about how there can be synergy between public bus transportation system and private e-hailing apps. Because what you find is that, except you're very lucky, the bus will not drop you at your bus stop. We do not do the last mile transportation. So we will take you to hubs, we will take you to major bus stop. But that last bit of transportation from your house, from the bus stop to your house still needs to be covered, right? So that's why we need e-hailing apps like Uber, Bolt, whatever it is, to help. So a situation where I can have an app for on my bus. I have a bus app, and as I'm getting down from the bus, I can book an Uber. It's something that would help not just Uber, but also help LBSL and all the other companies. A situation where it's reversed. I'm in an Uber, but yet I can check what the bus schedule is like, is something that helps. And that brings me to another major challenge, scheduling. Like, we are a private company, and the dream is you get to your bus station just the way you find it in any developed country, or even developing country. At 10:05, a bus is coming. You know that at 10:15, another bus is coming. What you find now is we are reliable when it comes to the beginning of the day, end of the day. There will always be a bus at the bus station. So when you get out of your house, you know you will find a bus when you get to our bus stop. But that's scheduling that allows you say, okay, I'm going out at 10 o'clock. What bus is available? That technology is not yet available in Nigeria, and it makes it difficult for private citizens, well, not private citizens, citizens that would not usually use the bus, will not be encouraged to do so, because they're not sure that if I get to the bus stop, I will find a bus, or do I have to wait 20 minutes? That is maybe when they will call Uber. So yeah. So yeah, technology is welcome, different forms, whether it is Uber, whether it is scheduling forms, whether scheduling apps that the bus operator uses, whether it is revenue assurance. We can't move forward without technology. So it's welcome.
So do we expect a collabo between the public and the private transport tech drivers?
Pretty sure.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
We'll be
Pretty
looking
sure.
forward to that.
Except Ade has other ideas.
Okay. So I think you have a question in the Q&A. Person asks, what are the major legal and regulatory compliance requirements for ride-hailing companies like Uber and Bolt in Nigeria?
Okay. I've tried to stay away from speaking about ride-hailing companies because it's not my forte. I can speak about public bus transportation. So I would be more comfortable if maybe Ade takes that question.
Okay, but Ade has left.
He's left.
He left the.
Okay. So, okay, from what I know, right, I'm aware that the state, and by the state, I mean that the Ministry of Transport has a list of requirements that the public, the e-hailing apps need to meet in terms of their vehicle requirements, the driver's requirement, from things to like insurance, to ensuring that they have carriage, hackney permits, there are a host of, and I know because I've been part of some of those meetings, ride-hailing apps like Uber, Bolt have had extensive discussions with the state to try and find a win-win situation, because I believe it's quite clear now that entities like Uber, etc. cannot exist without some kind of regulation, because you are moving people, and the government needs to be sure that you're doing it in a safe and secure manner. So in terms of the nitty-gritty details, I wouldn't be able to speak to that, but generally, I know they have to have insurance, they have to have hackney permits, they have to pay licensing fee. I believe how much that they finally agreed on, I can't say. But yeah, if you want, you can. And this is to the person that asked the question. I'm sure this information is something that is readily available with the Ministry of Transport in Lagos State. So you can walk to, I don't know, I can't remember the name, the department, but I'm sure they will provide you with the nitty-gritty details. Or speak to the people at Bolt and Uber.
Okay. All right. I think that's all from your session for now.
Okay,
Yes. So, Mr. Chuma,
thank you.
your screen is
Hello.
blank. Okay. Yes. So, we're sorry for keeping you waiting. So,
Okay.
yes. Do you have any presentation for us, or
No, I don't have a presentation. Can you hear me?
yes, I can.
Okay, I don't have a presentation, but I'll just speak to the topic. And just to add a bit to what Folake said with respect to the legal and regulatory compliance for ride-hailing companies. So Ade mentioned it when he was speaking that in 2020, based on the Lagos State transport reform law, there's also now the guidelines for e-hailing companies. And part of that requirement is a 10 million naira licensing fee. I know there were discussions around that fee being quite high, and there was a 20% reduction. So I think what is obtainable now is a 8 million naira licensing fee, and then a previously 5 million naira renewal fee yearly. But it has also been a 20% reduction has also been effected, so making it 4 million naira. And then, yes, the hackney permits, yes, the driver's licensing and some other requirements with respect to the drivers being compliant and up to date with their licensing in Lagos State and what have you. So that's on one side. So to talk a bit deep about the topic, generally, let's look at it from where we are coming from, where we are today and where we are going to. So I know that Lagos State has a master plan with respect to what they envisage the transportation sector to be. And they have been trying very hard to follow that master plan. Interestingly, when the transport reform law was passed in 2018, there was a lot of excitement. And excitement because Lagos State took into cognizance the vital role that bike hailing services or even bikes were playing in major cities in Lagos. So when we are talking about the transportation sector, we are being broad. And then we are talking, so we have the waterways, we have the road transport, and then every other type of transport. Yeah, there are two-wheelers, or there used to be two-wheelers in Lagos, and three-wheelers like the keke and what have you, and also the bikes. And when the transport reform bill was passed in 2018, there was excitement because Lagos State considered the role that these bikes were playing in Lagos State. And yes, they said, you need to have a 200cc engine to be able to use the bike. That gave way to the big players to come into the bike hailing transport sector, like Gokada, Max, Ope, and what have you. Now, interestingly, that was happening, and yes, it was able to reduce the traffic congestion in Lagos a bit, particularly with respect to going to some areas. But still, there were concerns around security, particularly for these bikes. And then in 2020, there was a major turnaround by the regulators banning bikes. Now, first of all, I thought that some of these big companies would have maybe taken the regulator to court, because there's a law that says that bikes are allowed in Lagos State with a 200cc engine, And then suddenly, without repealing that law or amending that law, the Lagos state government is banning bikes entirely from plying around the Lagos road. So that was a major concern. But what you then saw was a lot of these companies, companies like Max, had to let off almost 2,000 riders, and where those people how they have reintegrated into the society is still, left for us to imagine. Um, Also, OPay had to recalibrate and go back to their fintech business and concentrate on their fintech business, and just stop. And they had spent a lot of money on assets, on equipment, on training these bikers, but then regulation came and wiped out everything. Those guys had also raised money. They had raised money. OPay got $170 million injected into their business, and a major part of it went to the bikes, or the O ride business. Also, Max had raised, I think, $7 million at that time, just like a month before that regulation came in. Interestingly, some people had seen the body language of the regulator before that time, like Safe Border is a Ugandan startup, and they were coming into Nigeria, and they had already seen the body language, and they decided to go to Ibadan and set up instead of in Lagos State, because of how they felt that Lagos State will respond to that regulation. And all this happened, and it's very interesting. So when we talk about the bus transports, or then the private car transports, at like 20 years ago, we only had the taxis in Lagos State, and those taxis were majorly regulated. So you had to have your license, you had to have, for instance, your Hackney permit. You also had to be painted in that taxi color, like most of the commercial buses now have that distinct color to identify them as commercial vehicles. And we went from that, straight from that, into private hailing kind of taxis. Now, Uber and Bolt came to disrupt those taxis. I know for certain that when Uber went to South Africa, it was a major problem for them, because the taxi organization they were quite organized at that time, and they had to take the matter to court to say private cars that have not been designated for commercial purposes cannot be conveying passengers for that commercial purpose. But in Nigeria, where the regulation was not too clear, it was easy for them to come in and then to take a large part of the market share. And of course, the customers are the ones who drive that business. So the customers felt that they were meeting their needs, and they moved on to them. And the regulator, Lagos State government, in this case, had looked at it to say, these guys are actually providing value, they're actually providing service, and there is need to regulate that sector. And that's why they came up with the guideline in 2020. Now, what that guideline has done is to ensure that there is proper records and proper statistics with respect to what these ride-hailing companies are doing. I know that Egypt was one of the first African countries to regulate Uber and Bolt, and there was a lot of issues around that also. Part of the regulations was that they will obtain a 5-year license for almost like $1 million. Then the company's drivers were to pay annual fees to obtain special licenses. Drivers are also to put a mark that refer to the service provider. So each car must have a specific mark that says this is Uber or this is Bolt, unlike what we have today, where most of those cars are just private cars. So like Ade said when he was talking, the relationship between drivers in Nigeria and drivers in England is completely distinct, because in England, the Supreme Court has said that they are workers, but in Nigeria, they're independent contractors. And that explains why those private vehicles are still the ones that are being used for the business. Then Uber will also pay taxes and insurance to the government. And I'm referring to the law in Egypt. The government of Egypt also has the right to determine the conditions of the working vehicles. So, for instance, they have said, oh, for vehicles that are to be used for Uber, you can't have more than a vehicle that is 5-year-old, you know, for those purposes. Now, another major issue that has come up with those regulations is with respect to consumer protection. So if you read the preamble to the guideline for the e-hailing services, there's a lot of concentration on the consumer, you know, and Lagos State has tried to look at it to see how can the consumer be better protected apart from just more taxes or, you know, expanding the tax net for the government by levying these companies and what have you. There's a lot of focus on protecting the consumer by ensuring that those cars are properly roadworthy, by ensuring that those drivers have the proper licenses. In Canada, for instance, there are several licensing requirements, and I'm referring to the driver's license now for most drivers. So there's a Type A driving license, a Type B. Usually, if you're driving a private car that is just your car, you could use a Type B. But for Uber drivers, there's a higher level of responsibility. So they need like a Type A driving license. And of course, you need to have passed several tests and done several things that are not ordinary provided for normal drivers or private drivers. So that just shows you that the government places a high priority on people who are driving Uber and Bolt and other ride-hailing services because of consumer protection. Now, another interesting thing that Ade also made reference to when he was speaking was in the area of data protection. So, what the e-hailing service now provides is that, you know, they are supposed to share data with the government. And that has raised a lot of issues because according to the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation, you need the consent of the customer or the owners of those data for you to be able to share it. But the government has clarified this to say they are not asking for customers' data or they are not asking for customers' details. What they are interested in is being able to understand maybe the history of moving around Lagos, able to understand where that it can also help them in projecting what needs to be done or where needs to be improved with respect to transportation in Lagos State. And that's where we are currently today. And the interesting thing is that technology has changed the way that transportation works. Now, for age-long sectors like oil and gas, maritime, energy, it's easy to regulate these ones because everything is clear. There are old laws that are applicable. You just need to tweak it a little. But for technology-driven businesses, and we're talking tech transport now, it's quite difficult for the government to regulate them. And usually what we see is that the government is always playing catch up. But this time around, the government has tried to say, oh, let's look at it differently. Let's see how we can regulate it in such a way that everybody who is playing in that sector can sit down together. And they made reference to them having a role to play in the present law, in the transport reform law. So there's a transport reform law 2021. I haven't seen it. I've not had an opportunity to look at it. It was just passed a few weeks ago. But the understanding is that a lot of things have been harmonized in that law to make it easier now, and also codify some of the guidelines that has come up with respect to e-hailing services, and some of these things that are happening within the industry, and also to take into consideration the technology disruption that is happening within the transport sector and within the transport industry. And that's a step in the right direction. But until we're able to look at the law and review it and also give our own thinking around the law, it will be difficult to comment on it. But like I said earlier, the Transport Reform Law 2018 give, and I'm very sure that the new law now will deal with the issue of bike hailing services, which was provided for in the 2018 law, because Lagos State having banned bike hailing, and that's mode of transportation can hardly be found, especially in the major roads in Lagos today. I'm very sure that this new law will also put an end to it in such a way that it will not be speculative anymore. So I'm also willing to take questions around some of the things we've discussed.
Okay, okay, all right. So, how do you think the issue of vicarious liability, all these the drivers, the Uber drivers, maybe when accidents occur, how do you think some of all these drivers they take the cars home or they take the car to? How do you think who is going to be liable now in maybe when accidents occur or when there is an issue with the car or another person or a third party basically, who is going to be liable for that?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. I'm sure Ade, who works in Uber, must have had issues like this. But ordinarily, there's a third party insurance, right? And every vehicle in Nigeria is supposed to have the third party insurance. When you buy your vehicle, you're supposed to pay for that every year. So in the event that there's an accident with the third party, it is supposed to cover for that. But on the issue of vicarious liability, and that's why the designation of a driver with respect to some of these companies is very important. So they have said that drivers in Nigeria are independent contractors. So if they are independent contractors, they are just agents of the principal. And so usually if they are independent of the business, they are supposed to take responsibility. But ordinarily, because Uber is seen like more like a big company, and these drivers are just offering services under the Uber platform, what we have seen in practice is that Uber takes a part of it, so is a bit contributory. So, but of course, insurance will look at it, determine who was at fault at the particular time that it happened, and then the company can take a bit of responsibility because they are in a much more bigger financial position to 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 um, to cover it up.
Okay. So have you heard of any recent case or litigation trend on transport tech companies? Has there been any legal issues that has occurred lately that you want to enlighten us about in Nigeria?
Okay,
Okay.
thank you, Chidima. Yeah, so I
Yeah.
was referring to the matter that I think Yetunde mentioned in her presentation
Yes.
about some Uber drivers having sued the company for designating them as independent contractors and not workers, and that matter was thrown away by the National Industrial Court, Justice Kanye, for being academic. So I guess we've not seen the jurisprudence around this area has not developed yet. And they also made reference to a matter before the High Court in Abuja with respect to Uber having sued AMAC for the parking permits or the parking licenses that that is that is in dispute. So apart from those two matters, there has not really been any. What we have seen most times is that when regulators come up with these regulations, a lot of the companies, I expected, for instance, I referred to the bike hailing services, I expected that they would have sought the interpretation of the courts with respect to the regulation that is still extant, and then the ban. So that's a clear mismatch. But apparently, nothing was done about it, and most of them, and I believe that would have been corrected now with the transport reform law that was passed 2 weeks ago.
Okay, so I think someone asked these questions. Are transport companies like Uber required to obtain any license or permits?
Yes, by virtue of the guidelines now for e-hailing companies, they are for any new person who is entering the industry now, he has to obtain a license from the Lagos state government. And I believe the deadline for the present companies to comply with that has also elapsed. So for any new company who is coming in, they have to obtain a license from the state government.
Okay, okay. So, how do you think you can advise startups as a legal, practitioner? Would you advise startups who are trying to delve into the transport tech industry?
So it's a bit tricky. And Ade is working for a multinational, so those guys have the weight and the strength to engage government in a very structured way. For new entrants, the thing is, due diligence is very important. Being able to understand that we live in a peculiar kind of environment, and then regulation can come up and just disrupt your business just like that. So being able to understand that these things happen, also engage government in everything that you're doing. Have at the point Uber had to, either Uber or Bolt had to get a government liaison officer, so they had to just create that designation in the company for somebody to interact with government all the time. And that was just basically what the person was doing. And most companies who are playing around heavily regulated industries also need to be able to have that. So you need to have a good relationship with the government. And it's also interesting, like, so when you move away from cars or from smaller vehicles to buses, you'd realize that there's a trend in the industry now. So when OPay was doing the O everything, there was O ride, there was O car, there was O bus, you know, they moved into the bus area. Another company by Onyeka has this farm crowd. He also has this other company, Plenty Waka. They are doing buses too. So they do ride sharing with buses. And and I know that they have been engaging the government with respect to what's the body language of the government. Are you thinking of regulating this area? Is there anything that we need to know so that we can be like a step ahead and we'll be proactive all the time? So that's a very key requirement for most startups, to be able to be proactive, to be able to engage regulators at every step, at every point in time, and every step they are taking.
So your final question, yes. So just as I have been asking everybody, what would you do if you were to be in the position of power, like the sole regulator? What would you change about Nigerian transport companies?
Yeah, I also take a cue from what Yetunde said, and I think that harmonizing our laws with respect to the transport sector is very key and very important. So it's not good and it's not healthy for drivers to, so when for instance you're driving on the road, you have to make sure that your vehicle documents are complete. Police is looking out for it, VIO is looking out for it, road safety guys are looking out for it. So there should be a harmonization of all these different areas, and also to be very clear with respect to what the regulation is saying. It's also good that we have regulations that are thinking ahead, thinking 5 years ahead and not just thinking of today. Because it appears that most regulations that come are just thinking of today. Tomorrow, if technology comes with something else, we try to amend the regulation again to be able to contain that technology. And it's not healthy for stakeholders and for practitioners. So we need laws, and that's something that I think is doable We need to be able to have laws that's are thinking about the future, are 5 years ahead. There are a lot of things happening in the tech industry, even in tech transport. So very soon, driverless cars will be coming to Nigeria. Very soon, electric cars will, maybe not as soon as in the developed countries, but it will definitely happen. So we need to be able to, have laws that can envisage some of these things and address them, even as we are now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chuma. So I must say it has really been a robust, interactive, and insightful session today. Thank you to our beautiful Falake, Mrs. Yetunde. Mr. Day is not here, so we still thank him in essential. Thank you to everybody for bringing a lot of light to this webinar today. And we look forward to having you on subsequent webinars. A very big thank you to our sponsors, Alex, GLIS, Sanko, Bloomfield Law Practice, and Advocate Law Practice for making this webinar possible today. And our next webinar series will be on Friday. And the topic is going to be on hotel law essentials. We are going to have amazing speakers that would come on to enlighten us on this particular topic. So, and lastly, yes, before I go, please subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch our past webinars and more webinars to come. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a beautiful day. Thank you.
Thank you.